Hello and welcome to another of my comedians interviews for my blog, Arichcomiclife. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 750 stand-up comedians and counting over the past 45 years. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, the wonderful Mr. Jack Barry. Yes! Hello, mate.
Hello. What an entrance.
How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Yeah, this is fantastic. Thanks so much for inviting me here.
Thank you. It's so good to see you. I've been a fan for years. You know that.
I do. I hope so. Yeah.
Oh, definitely, mate. Yeah. We're going to talk about your comedy career. It's all about you, this interview. So
that's what I like.
So I'm going to kick off with the first question. How did you become a comedian?
Well, I sort of got into comedy when I was a kid, I guess, like most people. I grew up watching it. My granddad always used to sit me down and sort of make me watch comedy, and then Brilliant. I didn't know how to become a comedian, and I just sort of asked my parents. I was like, how do you become a comedian? And they said, oh, I think most comedians are in the Cambridge Footlights,
right?
Which is true. They weren't far. They know nothing about. My parents are like, my dad's an accountant and my mum's a psychologist.
Brilliant.
No idea. But they said, yeah, I think most of them end up in the footlights. So I applied to go to Cambridge and I was too stupid to get in, unfortunately.
Surely not.
Yeah.
I find that hard to believe.
I had an interview and everything, and I think I maybe even said in the interview that my main reason for going to Cambridge was to join the Footlights, and they didn't take too kindly to that. So when I didn't get in, I went to Leeds and I joined the Tea Lights, which is the Leeds equivalent, and it just started up a couple of years. So in my third year at Leeds, I auditioned to be in the Tea Lights. And then I started doing comedy from there, basically. Like, started off doing sketch comedy, and then I did a bit of stand-up when I was at uni. And then when I finished university, I started doing stand-up on the circuit regularly. But it was nice sort of having. I think it's nice getting into it as a student because you have a bit of a safety net. First few Edinburgh Fringes, you sort of get used to performing, but you're not there by yourself yet. You get reviews, but they're reviewing the group. They're not reviewing you. And so it was like a safe way to ease myself into comedy, basically.
Did you, when you first started, did you go to pubs and do 5-minute slots, things like that? Take a friend along? Yeah.
When I started doing stand-up, my first stand-up gig I actually did. It was when I was at Leeds. There was a student stand-up competition. That was the first time I ever did stand-up. Right. It was called Tickled Pig. And it used to, and it was run. I think it started in Leeds, and then they used to do it at a few different universities in the north of England, and that was my first ever stand-up gig. And Leeds is a bit of a heavy university, so I hadn't been to bed the night before. Seemed like a good preparation. It was my mate's birthday. We went out to like a rave and stayed up all of the next day. And then I went and did this gig in the evening. I've never been so nervous in my whole life. Wow. I was on a calm down anyway. And I drank 4 pints to sort of settle my nerves and then got on stage. And somehow I won the heat of the competition.
Congratulations.
And then that was it from there, really.
Wow.
And then,
I know Leeds quite well. My cousins lived in Leeds for years in Menston. And so I what I love about Leeds is all the little villages around it, because you must have had a lot of character improvisation for your sketches for all the different characters in the different villages.
Definitely.
Definitely.
And I did some weird like extra bits of performing because I didn't do like a performance degree at all. I studied Chinese, so it was nothing.
Wow.
To do. Yeah. All the other people in the team, I did like drama or something, but
That's fantastic.
but I wanted more stuff. So we actually did I was in one of those, those like cringy theatre groups that go around to schools and they used to come and perform to you at school, and you do a play about don't do drugs. And so we used to do, and I was in one of those groups, and we used to go around the villages. We used to go to Halifax and Bradford and Skipton and the sort of towns and villages around Leeds, and do plays about why you should consider going to university and options for further education. And it was pretty dreadful. We had to, I got paid, but we had to there was one number where we had to do it was to Grease Lightning, and it was us talking about our A levels and what we were thinking about doing after our A levels. And it was fairly dreadful. But Leeds is great, and I did a couple of gigs in Leeds, but I didn't really get into stand up until after I finished at university.
So you were doing, was it a degree in Chinese?
Yeah, Chinese international relations.
Right,
so I went and I studied in Shanghai for a year. My degree was 4 years, and then and I've wasted it ever since, basically.
What sort of year are we talking about for your first gig then?
What year was it?
Yeah,
it was the end of 2009 when I did my first stand-up gig. Yeah, it was November, I think.
Wow.
And that was my first one. And then did my first Fringe in 2010 with the Tea Lights.
Yeah.
You stand-up gigs, and then I graduated in 2011, and that was when I really started sort of hitting the stand-up circuit, sort of late 2011.
Right.
That was when I got into it, when I tried to do it anyway. But it sort of, obviously, it was a good few years of me being fairly terrible at comedy between then and now.
I can't imagine that. What I like about your style of comedy is whenever you go onto a stage, and I've seen you many times, you come across as fearless. You're very, very confident with a crowd, and that is all down to experience, I can imagine.
It is, definitely. I think the thing with most, I don't know about how most stand-ups feel, but I always felt like I used to find it absolutely terrifying. And people always said that I seemed calm even when I wasn't. And I was like, I don't.
That's what I'm trying to say.
I've never been I genuinely, when I first started doing stand-up, every time I had a gig, I would sit on the tube on the way there and pray that the building burned down. I'd be like,
that's brilliant.
I don't want to have to do this gig. I don't want anyone to get hurt. Just please let something happen so that I don't have to do this. And then afterwards, I'd always feel great. And so I was like, and basically, I think it gets to the point where you've done it enough times, and you've got enough jokes that work.
Yeah.
That you don't have to be scared anymore.
That's the reason why I write this blog. I mean, I always say to folk, I'm not a reviewer, I'm not a critique, I'm not a diarist, I'm a member of the audience, and I go and I have a wonderful time.
Yeah.
And the blog's more of an enthuse for all you fearless heroes that get out there and do it. It must be absolutely terrifying. You've got 1 minute to be original, be funny, be endearing, and you've got to get a crowd.
You got to get yourself across enough that the crowd know who you are.
Yeah.
And that they like you enough.
Yeah.
And it makes you very paranoid about people liking you. I think, when you get on stage. I for years I'd worry about everything. I wouldn't get my hair cut. Because I would be like, if my hair looks too nice, then they're all going to think I'm a poser, and they're all not going to like me. So I looked scruffy for years because I just didn't want to look nice. I would wear crap clothes because I thought if I looked too sharp, then the audience might judge me as being up myself. And you sort of worry about all of these little tiny things.
Yeah.
And,
well, my home city is Carlisle. And but I've lived and worked in London for 25 years.
Yeah.
And I went to college at Stoke in the late 80s, and when I was there, Eddie the Eagle Edwards was a big celebrity.
Yeah,
and when
yeah,
I first
yeah.
saw him, I was lumbered with that. I was thinking, I'm his absolute double.
Yeah, yeah.
And
This
so,
is
you know, you're just going to live with it. But
it's yeah. Sorry, you go.
no, I was just going to say, I was just going to move on. When you're on stage, what do you like to talk about?
I don't know. I always like to think that I talk about some kind of important political issues, or I don't know. Like, I've always had this idea. You know, people have this idea of like, you know, being like George Carlin or someone and through the power and
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and I think that's and I think that's always the dream. But then actually, I find the stuff that always gets last is me talking about farting on the bus or something stupid like that. And so whenever I go to Edinburgh, I always have these lofty expectations of like, I'm going to write a show that finally solves racism or something like that. And then I end up just sort of talking about my own experiences, and I think that's all you really can talk about, isn't it? So
I think if you write about the things that you know, it must be easier to do.
It's easier to do, yeah. I had like an Edinburgh show a few years ago where the whole show was about legalizing drugs, because I was, you know, I really admired the comedians who would do great shows about racism or sexism or. And obviously, as a white man, I felt like I couldn't really comment on them. But then I was like, well, I'm a drug user, and so I can write about that.
Talk about that.
Yeah, and so I wrote this whole show, sort of skewering the war on drugs, and no one came to see it.
Mate.
I think it was genuinely my best show I've written, but I think the audiences of Edinburgh weren't ready for it.
Right.
And it was. And so since then, I'm still trying to find, you know, the golden thing to talk about on stage. But I think what I most like to talk about is my own experiences and sort of stupid things that have happened to me and you know, musings that I've had, and maybe try and be a bit more subtle about like on the world and on politics and things like that. I did one preview for that show, and one woman in the audience said she felt like she was being lectured. So,
oh no! Oh my gosh! No.
I'm still figuring it out.
Oh, I went to a gig in Edinburgh once. I've told this story before, and I was there with a reviewer friend of mine, and there was myself and him and a drunken Scotsman in the crowd. It was a little tiny room.
Yeah.
And the comedian ran out and went, "Hello, everybody," and realised there was only 3 people in the crowd. And he went, "Oh, come on." He said, "Thank you so much for coming along. I'll buy you all a drink and thank you." And the bloke in the front row went, "No, I want my £6. You've got to do it." And he did the hour.
I mean, yeah.
And I thought to myself, the show has got to go on. And
the show has got to go on. I think every comedian has a story like that. I've had several like that where I've come out and been like, should we go for a pint or should we do the show? And sometimes it's like, let's do the show. I had one.
Oh, mate, I have every. I'm behind you all the way with it all. I think it's wonderful what you do.
I mean, everyone. Yeah, there was one. I did one Edinburgh show. It was before I did an hour. It was 2012. It must have been. And I was splitting an hour with a friend of mine. You know, it's the way people work up to their first hour is when I was doing like a split hour on the Free Fringe.
Yeah,
we were doing it in this bizarre venue that doesn't exist anymore, and it was impossible to find. It was called Buffs Club. It was on the Free Fringe. It was on the Free Fringe, and the Buffs Club was short for the Royal Antediluvian Order of the Buffaloes, which was some kind of like Masonic lodge. I couldn't really figure out what it was. But
is this in Edinburgh?
yeah, exactly. But then like it was down this alleyway, and all of you know we got told in advance that this place was called Buffs Club. So on all of our flyers and our leaflets, it said Buffs Club. And then when you got there, the sign outside said RAOB. It didn't say Buffs Club anywhere. So no one could find it. And there was one day where I had to do the show, and we came out on stage, and the only people in the audience were two friends of my parents who I hadn't seen since I was a child.
Oh, God.
And they somehow found the show and had come to see it.
Wow.
And they asked me to still do it, even though they were the only people there. So we did this whole show for my parents.
Similar thing, mate. Oh, dear.
Yeah.
To date, what has been your best and worst gig?
Yeah, I never know what to say to these. I think there are a lot of best gigs. There are so many good gigs. I think. I mean, obviously, we met at ABC in Kennington.
Yeah.
Famously, the best gig in London. Anytime I've done that, I've loved it.
Yeah. It is a perfect room to play. It really is.
There are just some gigs that you sort of think that the biggest gig you've done might have been the best, but actually it's that perfect room and the perfect people in the room at that time.
Well, you're very kind.
So yeah, I mean, ones like that are always good. I've done a lot of shows for Berg's Nest, who are a production company who are great, and they're always the most fun gigs. But the biggest gig, I guess, the most exciting gig I did was I did a show supporting Russell Howard at the Comedy Central Festival in October. It was in October. It was in Southampton.
Wow.
A couple of years ago, and I think it was like 3,500 people in the audience at that gig.
Wow, that must have been terrifying.
It was absolutely terrifying. Also, I was the only person on the bill who didn't have their own TV show. It was like Russell Howard headlining. It was Rob Delaney, who was in Catastrophe, and it was Jamali Maddox, who has his own show on Vice.
Yes,
and then me. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Every other guy here has their own TV show. And so it was pretty terrifying, but amazing fun to perform in front of that many people. So that is a gig that will always stick in my mind.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and then in worst gigs, so many worst gigs I've had.
You want to tell a story of one? Or?
The one with my parents' friends was pretty up there. I had just one of my weirdest gigs was it was my first ever paid gig, actually.
Right.
It was for Finn Taylor. But he'd been asked, and he because he started in Bristol, he had a few sort of contacts for gigs around the sort of Bristol Somerset area, and so he asked me to do this gig, and it was the first time I'd ever been paid to do comedy, and it was in a village outside Bristol. I can't remember the name. It was called something like Wootton Under Edge.
Right.
It had a strange name like that.
Know it well.
Yeah, and it was in this it was in an old cinema that had been converted into somebody's house, but they were still running cultural events in their house. And it was in the back of this person's house. There were a couple of people from the village who were just on, who'd never done any sort of performing or comedy before. And the whole thing was compared by this guy from the local amateur dramatic society, who did the whole thing in character. He was this character called Harry the Spiv. And every second he'd come out and he'd go, "I'm Harry the Spiv," and he'd do these poems that just went on for ages. That no one really understood what the poems were. And he
I
was
wish
even
I'd been there.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a. He was even getting heckled by his own lighting man. There was one point where he did one poem which went on for so long that the sound man was like, "That's enough, Harry." He was like, "Okay, welcome on, Jack Barry."
It's a bit like Morecambe and Wise, not now Arthur.
It was like Morecambe and Wise meets. It was like Dad's Army.
Yeah.
It felt like we were sort of in some sort of resistance arts night.
Yeah.
And I just performed comedy to the coldest room of all time.
Oh, mate. But again, all experience. All experience.
But it was because it was my first paid gig, it also, I really felt like I was cheating these people out of something. I really was like, I'm the professional here now, and I don't feel like I'm giving these people their money's worth.
Oh, mate. But I mean, the Russell Howard support, that's fantastic. I first saw Russell Howard at Edinburgh, and it was the year he was breaking through. I think it was
Yeah.
2005, first year I went up. And
Oh wow! Was that when he was in Pleasance?
I've been going to Edinburgh every year. I'm gonna come on to this in a moment, but I had a new mobile phone, and when he like he bounds onto the stage, my mobile phone went off and I couldn't switch it off. And he took the piss out of me for the rest of the hour.
I mean, how can he not? To be fair, how could he?
And of course, with my laugh, I thought,
yeah, you're really drawing more of it. Yeah.
And when you were talking about ABC, I'm very privileged to be able to go there. But when I've been going there for about 5 years, and when I first went there, I used to sit midway back. Because I always thought my laugh would carry, and then of course he said, "Come." I was invited to the front row, and of course the rest is history. We once saw Tom O'Connor of all people in the 70s on holiday. He's a great comedian, funny man, and this was the first time I realised I could laugh loudly. I laughed so loud at his jokes. He was actually floored, and he had to leave the stage because I was laughing too hard at him.
That's great.
So, I mean,
it's the dream.
Here I am.
Comedian, to have someone like that in the audience.
That's very kind of you. You mentioned before about nerves. Do you get nervous before you go on stage?
Not so much anymore.
No.
Like I said, I did used to. I mean, to the point that I would be praying for the building to burn down.
I love that.
I get real weird rushes of adrenaline. I used to hiccup quite a lot before I went on stage, right. Which apparently is like sometimes when you have too much adrenaline, you yawn a lot. I yawn a lot, and these days I don't get too nervous unless it's like for something huge. So for that Russ Howard one, I got incredibly nervous.
Right. That's understandable. Yeah.
And sometimes I think sometimes I get a bit nervous if it's like a new material gig. You know, if it's like a joke that you've no idea if this is gonna go or not.
But what a drug when it goes.
I mean that's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, once you when you first really like the rush that you get from doing comedy, I find is from the new material.
That's brilliant.
Like you get to the point that if you've done a joke 100 times and you know it works, getting up and doing it on stage doesn't give you the same buzz that it did. It's it's like chasing the dragon, heroin or something. And then to get that new buzz, you have to do a new joke, really. And then it's like once that new stuff starts going well as well, that's you're right back up there again.
It's so good to hear this. It really is. How do you remember all your routines? Do you write it down on your hand? Do you have a notebook? Do you record them?
Yeah, I mean, I record like when I'm writing a new show, I'll go on with a notebook and I'll have it sort of written down as like usually just like a one-word like prompter, like don't forget to say this, just to sort of drive me along. And then I never really written stuff on my hand because I didn't like the way it looked when comedians would do that. So I
don't like that when they keep looking.
I tried to sort of wean myself. I did it like for the first couple of gigs I did, but then I tried to stop myself doing it. And then, I always record stuff and I always listen to it back. And then...
I hope you can hear it with my laugh if I'm in the audience.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's always great. I still keep like some good previews. I still keep the recordings because there was a particularly good audience that day, and I'm like, there was one I did a preview just before the last Fringe. I did a preview on the Cutty Sark in Greenwich, and it wasn't a guy with a good laugh, but there was a guy in the front row who was a real dick. And I really put him down really well, and the audience all were like applauding, and I was like, that's a good one to listen to when I'm feeling down.
That's brilliant.
But the hardest thing to remember is an Edinburgh show because it's like an hour of
an hour long, isn't it? Yeah.
So I have in the last couple of years started literally like rehearsing it like it's a play and just like pacing up and down in my bedroom and just writing it until. Because that's the problem with comedy is like it's not funny if you're stretching to remember your lines, even if it's a funny joke. It doesn't feel. It's hard.
It's not natural enough, is it? Yeah.
No, and I mean, it amazes me still, like the number of people who don't realise that comedians write their jokes or prepare them. I still meet people who are like, "Oh, I thought you just went on stage and said funny," and it's just like you just naturally are that, which is very nice that people can think that about you. But I've done gigs where people come up to me afterwards and they're like, "I heard you tell that joke before."
Yeah.
I've
got a friend who always criticises, "I've heard this before." I said, "Well, they're doing it again. It's the way to deliver it."
No, it's like you go to the Rolling Stones and then kick off if they play Brown Sugar, do you? That's they worked hard on creating that.
It's a great song. It's a great routine.
Yeah. And so so it does surprise me, but so to make it funny, you have to know it so well that you can like play around with it and act like it is coming off the top of your head, even if it's not coming off the top of your head. And it
is amazing how you remember it all. You think of comedians like Frankie Howard, who every U and every R was scripted, or Bob Monkhouse with his joke books, or Ken Dodd with his memory of where he was and everything. It's fantastic how they they're all just gag writers, but story-wise, I wondered if you had specific points that you can remember as you go along, and then it triggers off another. Yeah,
I usually do. Yeah. It's in my head. I sort of like picture everything. It's like sort of colourful shapes that together. And so I'll think of like a routine or a bit as being like a certain blob. And I know that blob follows that blob. I'm sort of going from sort of island to island, and I know where the bits are, and I know how they follow on. But sometimes, you go on deviations and you get talking to someone in the audience or something makes you, and sometimes you do improvise stuff. But then
you're very good at that. You're very good at that with an audience.
I try to do that because I do enjoy doing that, and I think that does keep it fresh, and it's just fun for the audience, I think, if they if they can tell that you're doing something that's just for them.
Spontaneity, I think, is the word, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then I know I've got like the blobs in my head that I can
you can always come back to.
Yeah,
fascinating. Let's move on to Edinburgh properly, the Edinburgh Fringe. I first went to Edinburgh in 2005, and I've been extremely lucky to have been gone ever since. I go there for a week and I see about 50 shows, and I need a holiday when the time I come back. But I absolutely love the atmosphere and just the wonderful thing about it. Tell me about your very first Edinburgh festival. What year was it? What did you do?
But the first time I went was like 2006, I think.
Wow, mine was 2005. So
actually, it might have been 2007. Now I say
right, yeah.
No, it was 2006. Anyway, and I just went as a punter, and like I said, it was at that time, and I knew that I wanted to go to university and try and start doing comedy. Yeah. And I hadn't got into Cambridge, but I had got into Leeds, and so I went up. And I went to just see like a few shows, and I just went, and like you say, I was completely bewitched by.
It is amazing atmosphere, isn't it, when you step off the train?
But exactly, and just the magic of it, and like the. In fact, it must have been earlier than that. I went one year. If it was for my mum's birthday, I can't even remember when it was. We were up in Scotland, and she'd always wanted to go, and so we went. And
cool mother.
Yeah. I mean, every year. They go every year, my parents, and have done, since before I went. And so, I went up one year, just watched lots of shows. I can't even remember really what I saw, but then I went back another year, and so that must have been 2009, I think I went. And a friend of mine was doing a show. A friend of mine was in the Durham Review.
Right.
He was in Durham, and he went, and I went and saw him. And then I was like, next year I'm coming back to perform. There's no way I'm not coming back next year. And so then I auditioned for the Tea Lights and got in that year.
So you went up as a member of the Tea Lights sketch group, yeah?
Yeah, so that was 2010. That was the first year I went. And so I did that for 2 years, 2010 and 2011.
Yeah.
And then I went every year since then, basically. I did 10 years in a row of going in some capacity or other. Yeah, and it was a lot more fun. I mean, it was a lot more fun, I have to say. When I was a punter, I loved it. And then when I was a student, I loved it because there's no pressure when you're a student. You just go. You got boundless energy as well. We'd go out and get pissed every night, and then we'd be on the Royal Mile.
I still do. I don't know how I do it.
Yeah, I mean, I still do it more than I should, but it's just like for a month.
It's just brilliant.
You can't maintain it for a month anymore. Like I just with the best will in the world, but then it got a bit more stressful. Like I did a few years, so there was a couple of years as a student, then I did a few years just on the free fringe when no one knew who I was. And that's just stressful because you're grafting and you're learning. And then I did a couple of years where I was in like showcase shows for like up and coming stand-ups. So I did the Comedy Reserve at the Pleasance one year, which is a way that a lot of people get into.
Yes, That's with two others, isn't it? You do 20 minutes each.
Yeah, no, it's 4 of you actually.
Oh, 4 is it? Right.
Yeah, so it's 4. So you audition, and it's part of this charity they're called the Charlie Harthill Trust that the Pleasant run every year. And that's amazing. And lots of incredible people have done it before me, like Jack Whitehall did it, and Daniel Rigby, and Lou Sanders, Joe Lycett did it. And now loads of people on TV have done it as well. So that was great. So I did that in 2013. And then the year after, I did the Comedy Zone, which doesn't exist anymore, but that used to be a thing. That launched even bigger names in comedy. That was like, had been running since the 90s and launched people like Russell Howard and Stuart Lee, and even like, Frank Skinner, I think. Yeah. The Comedy Zone. But it had been running for more than 20 years, I think. Wow. And then the year I did it was the last year they ever did it.
Well, at least you did it.
Yeah, at least we did it. It had, I think, the numbers had been like waning the last few years.
Well, that's not your fault.
No, we really felt like we killed it dead the year we did it. Yeah.
When I did a bit of research on you, I read that the Tea Lights, which you remember of, got Best Student Sketch Group at the Fringe.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yeah. That was the year that I was in it. That is
incredible.
Yeah, the National Student used to do like an award for the best show.
Well done, you. That's fantastic.
It was like I think it was the only award I've ever won. And there was no ceremony.
Big enough.
But we felt pretty chuffed to have done it. I mean, it was a good.
That is fantastic, mate. And leading on from that, I wanted to ask you. You have touched on the writing process, but is writing for a sketch group different to writing for a solo show?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I mean, you can sort of, in a way, you can talk about more things as a stand-up because you can just say anything and you can sort of paint a picture with your words, you know. I mean, we always used to laugh about it a bit because some of the sketches we had as, you know, there's a bit of a, I don't know if snobbery is the word, but it's a bit of a stereotype that like student sketch comedy is like, you know, it's sort of, I don't want to suck off student comedy because I think it's great.
I know what you mean.
But we fell into all the pitfalls that you expect from student comedy. Like our shows were ridiculous in so many. We had the stupidest props. And they were so puerile, and loads of them had like references to daytime TV or like kids' TV, something like that. We had one sketch where there was a guy with a big pair of fake tits on his head. No, Annie McGrath, who you might know, she does a lot of stand up now, so she was in it with me, and that was when we met. and she had these huge pair of fake tits on her head, and you know. And then the whole sketch was that the plastic surgeon had put them in the wrong place. So it was
that's brilliant.
And so, yeah, it was different. A lot of the sketches that we had were just because we found a funny prop and we wanted to include it somehow, and we'd write it in.
This is hilarious. You've got to get the tits.
Yeah, exactly. We had a whole sketch which was like match of the day, and it was like pundits talking about a game of cock or ball, and like analysing it like it was a serious game of football, and looking at instant replays of a guy getting a bit of flesh out of his trousers. So
brilliant.
Yeah, but I still love writing sketches, and I still love writing like that sort of thing. Like I try and write short films and stuff because
good for you.
I do think that's kind of my first love in a way is sketch comedy.
Yeah.
It's a shame there's not really the same. You know, I grew up with like The Fast Show and Harry Enfield and Chums and those sort of like the pinnacle of sketch comedy.
Just very, very quick sketches. Yeah, they were brilliant. They
don't make it anymore. It's a shame, really. It's
that's brilliant for you, mate. I've also seen you host many a comedy night. You mentioned ABC, but I also saw you host the Burke's Nest show at Edinburgh.
In Edinburgh, the Midwest.
I could clearly see you were having a fantastic time doing it. Do you prefer comparing to performing a routine?
That's a good question.
Because you're very good at comparing.
I do love comparing. I love them both, really. I think like what we were talking about earlier with like spontaneity and like having a chance. I feel like you have more chance to do that when you're hosting. And I love just talking to the people. I remember that show, actually. There was a guy in the front row who was like a spy or something, wasn't he?
That's right.
That was one of those moments.
It was about 2 or 3 rows in front of me. Everyone knew.
Yeah. And it was just like, you have shows like that where you're like, oh, this is so fun. Like, you just get someone really interesting in the audience.
Well, you're made, really, aren't you? Because you can always go back to them.
And I do love that kind of thing. I mean, occasionally, like when you've got like a good routine that you really love and you're really proud of it and it's come together and you get on stage and it kills, there's not really any greater feeling than that.
No, I can imagine.
That is art in a way, isn't it? It is like, I mean, I hesitate to call stand-up comedy art because it's...
it's certainly creative. It is,
exactly. And it's like doing that, it's like, that I don't know, it feeds something in your soul, I think, like having something you've created, the response that you want. So in that way, I do love doing sets, but I love hosting. I think I'll always love hosting. It's it's something I really enjoy doing.
Well, your resident compere at the Mild Friends Comedy Club in Oxford.
I was.
Is that still going?
No, it's not anymore.
No, because I was going to ask you about it.
Yeah, that was.
Tell me about the experience of that then. When it was.
That was when it was just after I graduated from university. I'm from Oxford. Yeah. And one of my mates who was in the Tea Lights with me is also from Oxford. Well, actually, weirdly, loads of them were like 3 of us were from Oxford. Annie, who I ended up doing a double act with for a few years. She's also from Oxford. Yeah. And then my mate Patrick Turpin, who's another performer, he and I were both from Oxford, and we both graduated at the same time. And so we'd read somewhere that a good way to get into comedy was to start your own night, because then you get to meet lots of other comedians, and it forces you to keep writing material because you're performing every month. And so I hosted that, and that was when I first got into it, really. And that was. It was just in this little pub on the Cowley Road in Oxford called The Library, and we used to do it every month.
Oh, brilliant.
I loved it. Yeah, I met so many cool comedians.
Yeah. And it is like a proper club, because if folk keep going back, you build up reputation. And the
exactly. And we had regulars who'd come every month. It was scary in a way, because it meant I couldn't do the same jokes every month because I had the same people coming every month. So
Heard it.
It forced me to start writing. I used to get very nervous before my old friends. But it always forced me to keep writing stuff. And I used to host it. So that was when I first got into comparing. And I first realised I enjoyed that.
So how long did it go for then, the club?
It was about 3 years, 2 or 3 years, I think.
That's a good stretch.
Yeah, it was maybe 2 years, closer to 2 years. It was, and we still kind of do it. I mean, not as regularly, but when Edinburgh is running, when I'm doing my previews, I still resurrect my old friends for one night a year to go and do a preview show just before the Fringe in Edinburgh. Yeah. And some regulars who still come to those shows. And I usually invite like one other comedian along, and we sort of double it. So yeah, that's really nice. Like the guys who run the pub are an absolute legends.
Brilliant.
And so they usually have me back each year.
Well, if ever you do it again when we come back into the normal world, I can easily get the Oxford Tube. And we'll make a night of it, and let me know when it's on again, because I'd be fascinated to see it.
I definitely will. Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
That'd be really great.
It's a really nice room, and it's like underneath. It's and I met so many like cool comedians doing that show.
Of course.
I first met Nish Kumar there, and like Nick Helm and people like that. Like when they came to do our gigs. So it was it was a great time actually doing.
I once talking of Nick Helm, I couldn't get in to see his Edinburgh show, Phoenix from the Flames.
Yeah.
So I thought, where's the nearest place to London that I can go and see him? And it was in Aldershot. So you get the Waterloo train to Aldershot. And I'd never ever been there before, and I had 4 hours of my life walking around Aldershot. I've nothing against Aldershot, but I had nothing to do.
Yeah.
And I found a Wetherspoons. And Nick Helm was outside it smoking a cigarette. And he went, "Oh my God, mate, what are you doing here?" I said, "I've come to see you. There's nothing to do."
That's
It was made up. It was wonderful.
Well, that's basically the life of a comedian. You got like a little extra there. It's turning up in random towns that you've never been to before and having to kill a few hours before the show.
What's wonderful, just thinking of Carlisle, is a lot of people do that now. Go to Carlisle and do it on the tours.
On the way to Edinburgh.
Yeah, on the way up to Scotland and stuff. It gets a lot of gigs, which is great to see, because that is, it's. I'll always be very, very proud to come from there, but they've never had any gigs or anything for the last 2 or 3 years, so it's great to see. What is your ambition as a comedian? Would you like to be on TV? Would you like a talk show? Would you like to write? What is there any specific ambition?
I mean, I've always loved sitcoms. I've always kind of wanted to have like a good sitcom.
Good lad,
good comedy. Like that was sort of my, what I fell in love with when I was a kid and what I used to love watching. So if I could ever, I don't know. I mean, I've written a few pilots in the lockdown, so I'm trying to see where I get with them.
Oh, I wish you all the best. I really do, because
the dream is to be like a movie star.
That would be amazing. I'm a massive sitcom fan as well. The Royal Family, One Foot in the Grave, Fawlty Towers, Only Fools.
Exactly.
Whatever Happened to the Lightly Lads, Rising Damp, on and on.
Blackadder was like my favourite when I was a kid. I used to quote that relentlessly.
It was so good in it.
Rick Mail, I used to watch The New Statesman a lot, and I just thought he was the funniest guy in the whole world. So
I was very lucky to see him live in Carlisle, Rick Mail.
Really?
And he before he came on stage, he had the theme to the Muppet Show intertwined with the theme to Dallas, and it kept scratching on a record. And damn, you could just hear all this off stage. And then he jumped on. He went, "Ladies and gentlemen of the Carl." He called Carlisle the Carl. It's Rick Mail, and his trousers exploded. And the person next to me did not laugh once. And after about 5 minutes, he came down into the crowd and threw him out.
Really?
And I don't know whether it was a plant, but it was so brilliantly done.
Because he made it really fun as he did it.
It was one of the best gigs I've ever seen.
That's so cool.
He was an extraordinary talent and much missed.
I mean, you are incredibly lucky to have seen that. Yeah, I mean,
I was extremely lucky, but it's such a great memory to have seen him do his stuff live. You know,
an absolute legend.
Oh, he was. We're all living in really odd, strange times. It's been very horrible the last 18 months or so. Have you found online gigs? Do you do any online gigs? And how have you found them different opposed to live gigs?
I've done a few of them. I mean, obviously that it's not the same, is it? It's not the same as being in a room with people. But again, genuinely, and I'm not just saying this, ABC is the best one that I've done. Like, it is. I've done a few where you can't really hear I've done a few where you couldn't hear the audience or you couldn't see the audience. And you just feel like a madman. You're just like on your own in your room, like yelling into the abyss. And I did one gig where the two acts who were on before me both had internet fuck ups. So I was on about 20 minutes earlier than I thought I was going to be, because both of these people cut it out halfway through their set. And so the whole set, I didn't even know if anyone could hear me. I don't think anyone could hear me. Yeah, I genuinely was like, I don't know if, and I was like talking to my cat. I was like, "Here's my cat." And I was like, I don't know. And it was only afterwards that the tech person was like, "Yeah, we could hear you the whole time." I genuinely had no idea. So,
thanks.
So that was strange. So. Yeah, and so then
similar with
the antithesis of that is doing NBC, where you can see all the front row and you can hear them, and it feels as close as you can get to a normal gig.
It is. The tech guy, Tim is extraordinary, and James is just the best compere. I think.
Exactly.
And it's just such a warm place, but.
It's and it's the fact that they even have like people on who aren't even necessarily stand-ups. I did it with Mel Gedroych. He just sort of chatted to the audience.
I remember that. Yeah. You were superb that night.
The weirdest one I've done, I did one corporate gig just before Christmas where I could see them all, but only one guy had his microphone on. That was the worst one, because he wasn't even laughing that much. He didn't have a very good laugh, and he didn't. So every single joke I did, everyone knew that he wasn't laughing at it, because occasionally he would laugh at a joke, and I don't know why no one else. I could see people were laughing, but no one would turn on their microphone. So that was mortifying.
I've been to gigs where there is no sound at all from the audience, and of course with my laugh, I just end up laughing at four walls, and I think I'm going to be taken away. You got neighbours banging on windows.
It just feels so weird. So some of them have been great, and some of them have been awful.
Yeah, but I mean, this is great, but I'm with you. You cannot beat a live experience, and I so miss it. I so miss going somewhere like the Soho Theatre or the Banana Cabaret at Balham or the Soho Theatre, and you make such a night of it, don't you? And you never know what's going to happen. That's the magic of it.
It's just, there's just something. It's a weird thing as well. You notice it as a comedian. There's some weird. Someone should study it really, like the psychology of crowds, like the way that audiences can kind of. They're like I don't know, they can become like their own being in a way.
Yeah.
And, when you're on stage, you can be like, oh, well, look, they're not going for this kind of material tonight. I'm going to do more this kind of material, because somehow collectively, telepathically, as a group, they've decided that they like this kind of comedy instead of this kind of comedy. And you just don't get that with an online gig.
No.
It's more digital. It's more like in a box, but there's just something so magical about
live is unbeatable.
People.
Please come back soon, live comedy.
I know.
Who are your favourite comedians, past and present?
We've spoken about Rick Mail, obviously, and people like that. I mean, I do think that Dave Chappelle is probably the best stand-up. There's just that his material and how long he's been going, and some of his just. I mean, when I was talking earlier about wanting to do something that's political but personal but funny at the same time, I just feel like he encapsulates that in the perfect way. So I've just always been obsessed with him. But then a lot of people that I know, I love James Acaster. I just think and I was lucky enough to get to support him on tour for 3 years when I first started doing comedy, and I was not good at comedy. I met him at a gig at the Bristol Student Union when I'd only been going for a couple of years, and he and then like a few months later he asked me to support him on tour, and it was just after he'd been first, and I did it for 3 years.
Good for you. I bet that was amazing. It
was incredible. I learned so much from him, and because he is just like the best in the
I think he's one of the best at the moment, without a doubt. It's this fact that he can take a word and he can just expand on it. I just saw how he did it when I was touring with him. Like, even we'd be on tour, like touring his last show that got nominated for the Edinburgh Comedy Award, and then he, like, every night he'd be working on his new show. I would go out and do like 15-20 minutes of warm-up, then he would come out and do 20 minutes of brand new stuff, then there'd be a break, then he'd do his award nominated show. Wow.
And then every morning when we come down, I'd be hungover because I had a few beers after the gig, and he'd be like making notes and changing.
Wow.
And you was like, I could see why. That's why he's the best. He gets it, and he works harder than anyone else I've ever met.
Wow, that is a great answer.
He's
so good.
I love. Yeah, I mean, I love so many of my friends, like Lou Sanders and Mae Martin, are just two absolute favourites as well.
The reason why I ask it is that in my blog, I've got a section called "The Ones That Got Away," and I've listed 25 comedians who have either passed on or I haven't had a chance to see.
Yeah,
and I would have loved to have seen them. Bob Monkhouse is in there. Dave Allen. Norman Wisdom, Russ Noble. I've never seen live. I've seen on.
Do you know what?
Yeah,
I've seen him twice before I ever started doing comedy. He was like I think the first stand up I ever saw live.
I'm amazed. I just have not had chance to go and see him because I really want to see him. I have seen him on stage as Igor in Young Frankenstein.
It was great. But he was great. He was one of the people who made me want to do stand up.
Yeah. He's another one which just takes a word and goes off on it.
He had a DVD called Randomist that I had when I was a teenager, and I remember watching it after my parents had gone to bed, and I thought I was going to die. I genuinely thought. You know when you're laughing so hard that you start choking?
Yeah. I've been there many times.
I couldn't get it. It was the first time it ever happened to me. I couldn't get any air in my lungs, and I thought, is this how I'm going to go? And
I'd love to see him. Like me, do you go to a lot of comedy gigs as a member of the audience?
Not as much as not as much as I used to. I mean, obviously, before I started doing comedy. And then once it became my job, I really went off it for a bit.
Yeah.
I think. And
even I can't go every night.
No, exactly. And it was and then, but actually in the last few years I've done more. Because
if you're on a bill, do you stay and watch the rest of the acts?
Sometimes I do. Yeah. If they're my friends and if they're people that I really want to see, I do. I mean, I always like. There's always like certain shows in Edinburgh that you really want to see, but when I'm in Edinburgh, I'm quite often not in the mood to see stuff, and I always get to Edinburgh and there's a huge list of stuff that I want to see, and then I find I'm just too knackered every day.
Well,
so the last couple of years, I've made a really concerted effort to go and see all of those shows when they do the Soho Theatre.
Yeah.
And so I have actually started going to Soho quite a lot to see the shows that I missed.
It is an incredible venue, that, because again, you can have your beers before and after, and they have a late bar, and you get to chat to everybody, and it's very much like Edinburgh, but there's only the 2 or 3 shows on a night, and then you can.
But it's just like Edinburgh. Every time I go there, I bump into someone that I know. It's all. It's just like Edinburgh. You can't walk through the bar without
Yeah.
bumping into people. It's just like that kind of atmosphere.
It is. It's fantastic.
I love the Soho. Yeah, I was supposed to do a run there last June, actually.
Well, when it's back open and you're on, I'll be there, mate. I'll tell you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Definitely.
I'd love to go back. Yeah.
Just before we go, is there anything else you would like to say? Where can you be found on social media? Have you got any online gigs coming up? Have you got any podcasts?
Great. I'm on Twitter at Jay Basler, but I don't really like Twitter. I'm on Instagram at I am Jack Barry. I've got a website called jackbarry.co.uk where I put like sort of bits of stand up and silly little videos that I make and stuff. So check that out. I might be going on tour in the summer, but I don't know. Like, we're sort of trying to figure out whether we're arranging it. Yeah. The main thing I'm doing is I'm in Mae Martin's sitcom Feel Good.
Right.
Which the first series of that came out last year, and we've just filmed the second series just before.
Oh, brilliant.
So that should be coming to Netflix in March.
Right.
With the first series. So yeah, you can watch both series on Netflix from March. So yeah, check that out.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that should be fun.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been an absolute delight talking to you.
And you too. This has been lovely. Thanks so much for thinking of me.
My pleasure. I think you're superb at what you do, and I wish you every success. I really do.
Thanks so much. Yeah, fingers crossed.
All the best to you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.